a UK barrister, and we're going to be talking about the current conflict between Israel and Hamas. Natasha, would you like to start with the events of October 7th?
The circumstances that cause us to come together now 3 months after the 7th of October are unfortunate to say the least. It was in the early hours of the 7th of October that Israel experienced an attack planned, as we now know, for at least 2 years by the internationally prescribed terror organization Hamas. An attack that began, of course, with the firing of rockets and air raid sirens. And that now appears to have been a cover for mass infiltrations through the border on a scale which overwhelmed the limited security forces, which were at that time on a religious holiday stationed around the border area. And we all know now of the atrocities that were committed by Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist organizations, and by all accounts also by ordinary civilians who followed through those border breaches. When I say this had been planned for a number of years, it's important to understand that many people in Israel, while they would have been shocked that such truly horrific events could have happened, the nature of what happened may not have come as a surprise to many. And that is because if you have followed the media and literature and educational resources, specifically of the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip, but also across the Palestinian Authority and the West Bank, the nature of what was perpetrated was not surprising. In fact, it has been part of the stated agenda, certainly of Hamas, but also of other Palestinian terrorist organizations. And it is part and parcel, unfortunately, of an education system instituted 30 years ago through the Oslo Accords under the control of the Palestinian Authority, in which certainly the terrorists that crossed the border on the 7th of October had been educated from a very young age that the highest calling in life was martyrdom, and that their highest aim ought to be to slaughter as many Jews as possible. 3,000 terrorists don't wake up one morning and decide that it's a good day to slaughter Jews, and you do not create thousands of people who can perpetrate the kind of atrocities that we saw on the 7th of October, cutting the belly open of a pregnant woman, burning and beheading children, maiming them in front of their families, mass rape and slaughter, and the mutilation of people, both dead and alive. That is not conduct that I believe is natural in human beings, and it has to be taught and instilled in a very concentrated manner and with a concerted effort. And according to UN statistics, if we look at the number of children who are educated, who've grown up in the UNRWA school system, UN-run schools, 3 out of 4 of the terrorists who crossed the border on the 7th of October were educated in that school system, were educated to commit those sorts of terror atrocities. There are also other factors that led to the ability of Hamas and other terrorist organizations to infiltrate into Israel to commit the atrocities of the 7th of October. And when I say other Palestinian terror organizations, amongst the terrorists that committed those atrocities were PFLP members, the affiliates of Fatah, the so-called moderates in the West Bank that run the Palestinian Authority, and there were Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And it's important to remember that all of those terrorists who had previously been convicted, and some of those that planned the attacks of the 7th of October, were released in the Gilad Shalit deal, members of Hamas and the Nukhba force. They had been paid salaries continuously by the Palestinian Authority, the so-called moderates in this equation. These terror salaries under the Pay for Slay program, which is enshrined in Palestinian law, are paid to terrorists irrespective of what banner they coalesce under. And they are paid on the basis of the severity of their crimes, how many Jews they have managed to slaughter, and the length of their sentences. And so the incentivization of terror and the education and indoctrination towards terror that we have seen for a number of decades both contributed significantly to the 7th of October atrocities. But there is another factor that needs to be taken into account to understand the context of those events, and that is international pressure for security concessions. Because between January and August 2023, there were over 400,000 entrances from Gaza into southern Israel, mostly work permits, permitting people from Gaza to come and work in the communities that lived in the south along the border with Gaza. And we now know that these entrances, the workers that came over on these permits, were central to the planning of this attack. An attack that involved units of terrorists spreading out across the southern communities with clear instructions, paperwork that was found on them with maps, detailed information, house by house, on a household by household basis, how many people, how many children, whether there was a dog, whether there was a gun, and what they were instructed to do to each family. And when one takes into consideration that the people that lived in these southern communities were amongst the most vocal proponents for coexistence, for cooperation, for initiatives, for water supply in Gaza, and economic initiatives, driving Palestinian civilians at the Gaza Strip to hospital in Israel across the border when they were coming for treatment. These are the people that were attacked. These are the people that had done more than anyone else in Israel to seek to foster positive relations with their neighbors. And they paid for that with their blood. And the security concessions, one of which I've highlighted in the context of the permits that permitted people from the Gaza Strip to come into Israel on a regular basis, were also unfortunately a very significant factor in the planning and the ability of Hamas to execute what was the bloodiest day in Jewish history since the Holocaust.